Blog Talk Radio.
Hello everyone, welcome to Laurie Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good evening. It is 10 o'clock p.m. here in Calgary, Alberta, Friday, July the 1st, and Canada Day up here, our Independence Day, same as July 4th down in the States. And so I'm glad to be able to be here. This is Child Abuse Prevention and Human Rights Abuse Prevention is Up to Us, 30-minute live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com. And the chat room's open. I did pop the link. I didn't pop any links in there. Chat room's open, though. So if anybody wants to sit in there, you're more than welcome to. I just want to talk tonight about child abuse and neglect, and it's a guide. It's a resource pamphlet from helpguide.org. Helpguide.org. They've got some great information on there about child abuse and all the different types of information you can think of, signs, symptoms, and what is child abuse and child abuse prevention and survivor information and all kinds of good stuff. That's a great website, helpguide.org. And so that's what I thought we'd cover tonight. And, thanks everybody for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I have like almost 33,000 shows listened to. That's a lot of shows. I appreciate it. And, I appreciate everybody who's taking the time to listen to my shows. It's a lot of work keeping up with these shows. So thank you for taking the time to do this, to listen to what I have to say, and I really appreciate it. You have to listen to my shows at your own discretion. I say this on every show. It's very important to me. Abuse is a sensitive subject, and especially when you're dealing with somebody like myself who doesn't sugarcoat it and just tells it like it is. Everybody who listens to my shows knows that I was abused as a child, and I certainly don't minimize it, and I don't minimize any abuse, and I don't sugarcoat it, make it sound better than it, or make it sound more gentler or kinder. There's nothing kind about abuse, right? There's nothing gentle about abuse. Abuse is abuse. It's harsh. It's horrific. And it's not funny. And so I don't minimize it. I just tell it like it is. So if you're sensitive to the subjects and topics of abuse, then you might not want to listen to my shows. It's a good idea to think carefully about what makes you uncomfortable. And if you think the topics of abuse might bother you or trigger you or cause you any discomfort, then you have to ultimately do not listen to my shows, right? And if you're under the age of 18, I just ask that you would get permission. Have somebody older who's an adult who can help you make a decision whether you should be listening to my shows or not, because there's a lot of adult content on my shows. Even though I'm ultimately just trying to be another voice out here trying to stop child abuse, there is a lot of mature material on my shows because I'm talking about abuse. And so, I would appreciate anybody under the age of 18, especially young children, to have someone listen to the show with you to make sure that it's age appropriately something okay for you to listen to, right? So thanks everybody, I appreciate it. I was just over at Dreamcatchers Talk Radio doing the headlines over there, and that's Dreamcatchers Talk Radio here on Blog Talk Radio. We do shows Monday through Friday over there with different hosts, co-hosts, people that volunteer with Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. And so I'm a little bit tired tonight, as you can tell. But I wanted to do this show because I was sitting around today thinking about, these headlines that I was reading out and taking a look at for the show. And it's just so horrific what children go through. And I just wanted to talk tonight about what is child abuse, recognizing and preventing child abuse, understanding child abuse and neglect, and just raising a little bit more awareness, and I hope that, whoever's listening will get something out of this. I know I do every time I go through this material. It just helps to reinforce, the different types of child abuse. I grew up abused as a child, so I don't really need any help in that department. But what it does do is it helps me to learn to speak publicly about this, because I will be doing public speaking, for the rest of my life about child abuse and child abuse prevention. So it's just good to go over this stuff. And, there's a lot of myths and facts about child abuse and neglect. And they said there's myths that, generally, like the general public seems to believe these types of myths that aren't true. They said, they list off a bunch here on this particular guide from helpguide.org, Understand, Prevent, and Resolve Life's Challenges, and it's called Child Abuse and Neglect, Recognizing and Preventing Child Abuse. It's like a little information sheet, right? And they have myths and facts here. They said myth number one, it's only abuse if it's violent. And the fact is that physical abuse is just one type of child abuse. Neglect and emotional abuse can be just as damaging, and since they are more subtle, others are less likely to intervene. People may not see the signs of emotional abuse. They may see some signs of physical neglect, but they may not see the signs of emotional neglect. They may not. There's lots of signs that are just, unless you know the child and you can look look at behavioral changes, things going on with that child that might alert you that there's something going on, some abuse going on somewhere. Someone's either emotionally, psychologically, or abusing that child, even sexually, sometimes even physically. Not all physical abuse will be visible and seen. I was abused physically, and I didn't have a black eye every day. You know what I mean? Quite often my mother would pound my back, and my back would be covered. I'd be wearing shirts, obviously, not running around naked. Nobody would see those bruises that were on my back, right? My mother used to hit my head quite a bit, the back of my head. So instead of slapping me across the face, where it's visible marks and bruises, which she did, but she would also do things like, pound my body, and most people would not, you wouldn't know to look for those signs, nobody would see those, right? So, if I was beaten with a belt quite a bit, but I was beaten with pants on. I generally had pants on, and sometimes I had shorts on, and so, it didn't leave a lot of scars on the outside. I have some, but not very many. Most of the scars and the damage was all done on the inside, which is my heart and my mind, my psyche and my very being, my soul and my spirit. But it's not always just about violence, you know what I mean? It doesn't have to be violent to be abuse. It's not just about physical abuse. And they said, there's another myth, only bad people abuse their children. And they said, well, it's easy to say that only bad people abuse their children. It's not always so black and white. Not all abusers are intentionally harming their children, and many have been victims of abuse themselves and don't know any other way to parent. And others may be struggling with mental health issues or a substance abuse problem. And that's so true. Many people, I think people have this idea that abusers are these people that would walk around with these trench coats on or looking like a thug, unshaven, maybe some man who's, a lot of people think that only men abuse, which is really not true. And that would be somebody who's, wearing one of those sleeveless white tank tops, those t-shirts, those wife beaters or whatever you want to call them, who, drinking beer, slugging back alcohol and smoking cigars and might beat on their children. But actually it's people like just look like everybody else. They look like you and me. They're abusing their children. It's absolutely horrific. And they think that it's only bad people that abuse children. My parents had lots of friends. My parents were two of the worst abusive people in the world towards each other and towards their children. And yet they had many, many friends. They had lots of friends. They were very popular amongst the neighbors. The neighbors liked my parents. The neighbors knew my parents fought. They knew there was a lot of problems. And yet they just turned a blind eye to it because they wanted to be able to invite my parents to the barbecue, right? If you can't invite the parents to the barbecue, what good is that? So, the kids are just not looked at as being part of the scenario. So it's kind of like, well, nobody cares about the kids, send them off to play, whatever, as long as the parents can come to the barbecue, right? So a lot of people will overlook abusers and abuse because they like the adults. You know what I mean? There's so many people that will do that. And it's very, very sad, but it's true. And so child abuse doesn't happen in good families. That's another myth. Child abuse doesn't happen in quote-unquote good families. So child abuse doesn't only happen in poor families or bad neighborhoods. It crosses all racial, economic, and cultural lines. And sometimes families who seem to have it all from the outside are hiding a different story behind closed doors. That's very true. A lot of people think that child abuse just happens in families where there's a lot of poverty and maybe they're living on the wrong side of the tracks and in a rundown house and weeds in the front yard and stuff. It's just kind of ridiculous because people, teachers and doctors and lawyers and all these, well-paid and high-paid professionals abuse their children too. So it has nothing to do with, social, economic status or what color what religion you are, what race you are, what background you are. It really makes no difference. People abuse children, and all types of people abuse children, and anyone can be an abuser, right? I think that's important for people to realize too, that not just adults are abusers, kids can be abusers too, and grandparents, aunts and uncles. I mean, who do you think these people are? Most of these people out here who are abusing children are somebody's brother, sister, husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, grandmother, grandparent, grandfather, aunt or uncle, cousin, right? Cousin Jane, cousin Joe. People are abusing kids. They generally do have family members. It's pretty sad. They said most child abusers are strangers. This is another myth. And they said that's kind of what we're talking about. While abuse by strangers does happen, most abusers are family members or others close to the family, somebody considered to be sort of quote-unquote part of the family, right? Family friends. And it didn't happen, my brothers used to have their friends around, and my brothers were quite a bit older than myself, and some of these people were thugs. My brothers were drug users, and my parents were, not paying attention to much unless they were beating on us or hurting each other. And so my brother's friends would come and sexually molest me. And so the issue is there was two of my brother's friends that actually did that, not together, separately. And it's so sad. These people were welcomed into our home, and yet they were allowed to get away with that, broad daylight. Be very, very careful who you have around your home if you have children, and make sure that you know who these people are and that they're not going to be doing, trying to get a hold of your children, sexually use your children or molest your children or abuse your children in any way. You've got to know that this sort of thing happens, right? Myth number 5, abused children always grow up to be abusers. And they said it's true that abused children are more likely to repeat the cycle as adults, unconsciously repeating what they experienced as children. On the other hand, many adult survivors of child abuse have a strong motivation to protect their children against what they went through and become excellent parents. I think that's just proven. There's many people who have been abused as children who don't go on to abuse their own children, who get help, and they make sure that they're doing the right thing by their children. And I think that's awesome. They said the effects of child abuse and neglect. This is just like a little overview. This pamphlet here. It's like I printed it off, and it's a little information sheet, right? But it's sort of an overview. Effects of child abuse and neglect. They said there's a lack of trust and relationship difficulties. They said all types of child abuse and neglect leave lasting scars. Some of these scars might be physical, but emotional scarring has long-lasting effects throughout life and damaging a child's sense of self, ability to have healthy relationships, and ability to function at home, at work, at school. And some of these effects might include lack of trust and relationship difficulties, and also core feelings of being worthless or damaged. And they said lack of trust and relationship difficulties. If you can't trust your parents, who can you trust? Abuse by a primary caregiver damages the most fundamental relationship as a child, that you will safely, reliably get your physical and emotional needs met by the person who is responsible for your care. Without this base, it is very difficult to learn to trust people or know who is trustworthy. This can lead to difficulty maintaining relationships due to fear of being controlled or abused. It can also lead to unhealthy relationships because the adult doesn't know what a good relationship is. And that's been my problem my whole life. It's incredibly damaging and hard to overcome this stuff. And, I like people that listen to my morning show, one child abuse survivor to another, they get a real bird's eye view into what goes on behind the scenes of a person who's been abused as a child and then has to try to figure it all out as an adult. And it's a lot of work, and it's not an easy road, and it takes a long time. Sometimes I know everybody heals at different rates. Everybody moves through their healing process and journey at different rates and different paces, and some people choose to go to counseling and therapy. Some people do self-help. I'm doing self-help. I've talked to a few counselors and therapists, but mainly it's self-help. And I made a commitment to myself that if I couldn't do self-help, that I would get professional help. If I didn't see progress and I saw, myself regressing and going back to the way that I felt before and going back even further down from that, spiraling down, that I would get some help. And I've actually I've been able to progress at a really steady, kind of even pace, which is a very positive plus for me. And, I feel pretty good these days. And, even in the worst of situations when my sweetheart was almost dying, like May 18th, he just came out of the hospital. They diagnosed it. Well, he's been diagnosed 10 years, terminally ill. And so, he's been like on his deathbed really for 10 years. And so we're prepared. But the thing is May 18th, he just got out of the hospital. 2 weeks prior to that, they were not expecting him to leave the hospital. They were expecting him they told me to start phoning funeral homes and making arrangements and stuff. And I handled that really quite well. I was doing my shows at the same time here and in the morning, and had to skip some of my evening shows because I was going to the hospital for almost a month to see him. But you know, these type of things can cause, many times put that extra pressure on somebody who's already dealing with a load, a heavy load on them, and it can cause people to have a lot of problems. And I actually handled it quite well. I was able, my workplace was very understanding, and I had a lot, some support. I had support from my friends, and I handled it quite well. And I think that we can learn, as adult survivors of child abuse, we can learn to be able to cope, and that's a huge thing, to be able to cope with life, with what life throws at us. It's hard, but it can be done. And so I just want to encourage people, if you're listening and you're a survivor, to keep going and keep holding on, and keep looking for that hope and help where you can get it. Core feelings of being worthless or damaged is as if you've been told over and over again as a child that you are stupid or no good. It is very difficult to overcome these core feelings, and you may experience them as reality. Adults may not strive for more education or settle for a job that may not pay enough because they don't believe they can do it or are worth more. Sexual abuse survivors, with the stigma and shame surrounding the abuse, often especially struggle with the feeling of being damaged. These core feelings of being worthless or damaged. I know that I felt like that my whole life, and it's an awful feeling. It's a horrible feeling. Now I'm starting to learn to love myself. And so 4 years ago, when I started my healing journey, I actually started to say, I love myself. I love myself, and I'm trying to reach that wounded inner person that I was, from so long ago, doing a lot of inner child work and whatnot. And it's incredibly hard to go back, and we can't change the past. We can't go back and change that, but we can learn how to change the way we feel about ourselves now. And so I used to see myself very much as a victim, very damaged and very, just destroyed. Now I see myself as a thriver, a survivor and a thriver, because I'm doing well, and I'm trying to progress like at a nice steady pace, and enjoy this life, right? So it's great. I've come full circle, really. I'm just working on the last tidbits of my healing journey, and I think I'm doing really, really well. So it's awesome, but I know not everybody's there, and I know what it's like to be on the other side of that. So it's incredibly harsh, and I hope people will realize that, and realize that we have to stop child abuse so that no child has to go through this, right? Trouble regulating emotions is another issue. Abused children cannot express emotions safely. As a result, the emotions get stuffed down, coming out in unexpected ways. Adult survivors of child abuse can struggle with unexplained anxiety, depression, or anger, and they may turn to alcohol or drugs to numb out the painful feelings. That was my problem. That's been my problem my whole life, regulating my emotions. When I was young, I was, down and angry and upset and turned to drugs at a young age, and finally got off the drugs at the age of 21 and didn't know what to do with my rage and anger, and a lot of it came out on people that I worked with or people that I had contact with in stores or wherever I was. And, it was absolutely horrible way to live. These feelings, and emotions would just stuff down there. They'd have to come out somehow, some way. So I started to self-injure, really was contemplating suicide, planning my suicides, actually. My whole life I was planning my suicides, really, until 4 years ago, when I made a commitment that was the end of that, and I was going to not ever plan another suicide again. So it's great. I made a commitment, and I'm sticking to it. But the thing is that's really sad that this is what this causes. And two of my brothers killed themselves. One committed suicide by hanging himself, and he had tried many times. People thought it was a one-time thing, but he had been trying to kill himself for years, and people kept saying to him. And finally he made it. And then another one of my brothers died of a drug overdose in a shelter, and he knew he was going to die because he would take bags full of pills from the time he was like 12 years old, and he actually lived to be 36. And I think it was 36, I want to say 37, somewhere in there. And so very sad. He knew those pills would kill him one day, so it was kind of like just a slow suicide. But very, very sad. This is what happens to people who do not get help. And that's why I wrote my book, A Life, Death, and Redemption, because I really wanted to be a voice for my brothers, as well as for myself and my siblings, my other siblings. There were 7 of us. And we were all screwed, every single one of us. And none of us are... I'd say I'm doing great because I'm on my healing journey. I don't know about my other siblings because they are still stuck in the same old dysfunction that they were brought up in. Types of child abuse is that there are several types of child abuse, but the core element that ties them together is the emotional effect on the child. Children need predictability, structure, clear boundaries, and the knowledge that their parents are looking out for their safety. And abused children cannot predict how their parents will act, and their world is an unpredictable, frightening place with no rules. And whether the abuse is a slap, a harsh comment, stony silence, or not knowing if there will be dinner on the table tonight, the end result is the child that feels unsafe, uncared for, and alone. So this is just what children go through, whether they're being slapped around, beaten on, verbally abused, told off, cursed at, or ignored, complete silence, just completely ignored, rejected, or neglected, their physical needs not being met, no dinner on the table, nothing from the parent that they need. This is very, very serious, and I just hope that people realize just how serious the child abuse really is and the effects that it has on a person. This is completely 100% preventable. Right? There's no reason for anybody to abuse a child. But people will come up with every excuse. Oh, I have to discipline my child. My kid is bad, or whatever. It's just that the parents' inability and inability or desire to not do right by the child. Right? Absolutely horrific. Emotional child abuse they talk about here. Constant belittling, shaming, humiliating a child, calling a child names, making negative comparisons to others, telling a child that they are no good, worthless, bad, or a mistake. Frequently yelling, threatening, or bullying at the child, yelling at the child. Ignoring or rejecting a child as punishment, giving them the silent treatment. Limited physical contact with the child, no hugs, kisses, or signs of affection. Exposing the child to violence or other abuse or the abuse of others, whether it's be the abuse of a parent, a sibling, or even a pet. And this is how I grew up. My mother used to tell me that she couldn't love me because I was born from rape, because my dad had raped her and I was born and I was the outcome of that, so she hated me. And she used to tell me that she wished I had died with the other stillborn babies that had died before me. There was 2 stillborn babies that died before me. They were born full term, but they were dead. And so she'd say, "You should have died with the other stillborn babies," and she'd slap me around and knock me into the wall and, horrible things like this. She would call me names. She would, of course, she'd say stuff like, "Oh, you're just worthless. You're just bad. A mistake." And she would tell me I was just a rape child. Frequent yelling and threatening and bullying. That was just a constant in our home, from every direction. Ignoring or rejecting a child as punishment, giving them the silent treatment. My parents would do this too as well. They were very psychologically damaging. They were mentally ill, my parents. Limited physical contact with the child, no hugs, kisses, or other signs of affection. That's what I got. No hugs. None of us did. As a matter of fact, none of my siblings, none of us were hugged or held or kissed or shown any signs of affection. And as children, none of us. And so, we didn't do that towards each other. You know what I mean? It just wasn't encouraged. And, the only contact that we really got was negative, being pushed away. Like I would try to hold on to my mother's dresses, for security or whatever. And my mother used to wear these long dresses, and I would hold on to them, and she would push me away. She would reject me. No hugs, no kisses, no nothing, right? Exposing the child to violence or and see then today as an adult survivor, I'm supposed to walk around with a smile on my face, right? I'm supposed to be happy, right? It's like, okay, as an adult, I understand how it is to be happy, right? I understand how it is to feel excitement and joy and good stuff in my life as an adult, because I've created this very nice life for myself, which most people would think was really bad. You know what I mean? Because it's maybe not less than perfect in most people's eyes, but in mine it's great. And it's still within me is this little child who says, "You want me to smile? You want me to be okay with this?" This is the damage that this stuff does, right? I hope that people will not forget this. Exposing the child to violence or the abuse of others, whether it be the abuse of a parent, a sibling, or even a pet. And that's just what I grew up with, violence. My parents were abusing each other physically, violently, sexually. My dad was raping my mother. My dad raped my mother in front of me. I tell everybody that because I'd like people to know who my dad really is. He passes himself off as a saintly Christian, man who's a saint, and he passes himself off to be this wonderful man. And he raped my mother in front of me, and he raped my mother repeatedly. That's why I was born, because my mother was not sleeping with him pretty much after my brother was born, and then And then there was my sister, another stillborn baby, 2 stillborn babies, and me. So my sister, there was 4 more children born after my brother, and my mother was not sleeping with my dad. So let's get the picture here. My dad raped my mother repeatedly, marital rape. So that's the kind of man he is, and that's why I tell people that all the time, because I want people to know just who he is, right? He's not a saintly Christian. He's not a saintly man. He's a horrible man, and he still has the nerve to call her a whore and a slut and horrible things. He's mentally ill. My dad is mentally ill. So there you go. Child neglect. Child neglect is a very common type of child abuse. It's the most common. It's a pattern of failing to provide for a child's basic needs, whether it's adequate food, clothing, hygiene, supervision, right? It's not always easy to spot, but sometimes it is, especially if the neglect is physical. And you can see that the child's clothing is just not adequate. You know, they're out running around in clothing that's just falling, either too big or too small, falling off them. Could be torn, could be dirty. You know, you see a child wearing dirty clothes, the same clothes day after day after day. You know that child's not being really looked after. If the child is dirty, they just have rashes breaking out on their skin. Their hair is never combed. They're running around outside with dirt on their face. I mean, you can pretty well tell, you know. But sometimes you can't tell if a child's being neglected, because sometimes they'll be clean on the outside. The parents will keep them, you know, somewhat cleaned up, or whoever the caregivers. But then they're not meeting their other needs. They're not meeting their could be even their educational needs. Could be their medical needs. Sometimes children need, obviously some children have like diabetes, childhood diabetes and whatnot, and you know that's a form of neglect. To neglect a child's medical needs, they may need glasses. They may need hearing aids. You know, hearing things to help them hear better, and the child could be being neglected in that way. So neglect is not always visible, right? It's not always something that people will see, but it's a good idea to keep an eye out for children. Neglect is actually the most common form of abuse. And so this particular article just goes on and on. I mean, they talk about child physical abuse, right? They go on to really explain it, and they talk about the physical abuse versus discipline. And child sexual abuse, a hidden type of abuse, which we talked about child sexual abuse not too long ago. I think it was on my show on Wednesday night. And risk factors for child abuse and neglect. And so, you know, I think what we'll do is we'll pick this back up on Monday night, because I want to finish going through this. This is some really good information. I hope you will all get this. This is from helpguide.org, and that's http://helpguide, GLP, guide, GUIDE.org, help guide. And just look for their child abuse tab. Click under child abuse and neglect, right? Recognizing and preventing child abuse. And this is, they have so much good information on there. I hope you will check it out. Check out our website, Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. Man, I'm telling you, that's a great website. That's my favorite because I'm a little biased. I'm the Canada Regional Director and the President-elect for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. And I just got this awesome honor of being promoted to the board of directors. So I am now, sitting on the board of directors as the president-elect. And, you know, that's a great honor. It's a great privilege. And I tell you, it's on behalf of these kids. It's for these kids that I'm doing this. You know, it's not for, it has nothing really to do with me. What it is I want to, along with them, help these kids. Somebody's got to do it. We're doing it. I hope you will get on board. Check out our website, dreamcatchersforabusedchildren.com. It's all you have to type in, Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. It's all one word. You can check out our website and see who's doing what. We have got a great team. We're all volunteers. No one's getting paid a dime. And I'm telling you, we are working as hard as we can. And, you know, if we can get some funding, we can actually do some work to help to make a real difference. But until then, we're going to keep on doing what we're doing. So make sure you do support us. If you don't want to support us, that's fine. But, support somebody. That's what I always say. Support somebody who's doing something out there, right? It's really important to get involved. Do whatever you can to try to make this change for these children out here. It has to be this generation. Why not, right? Have a great weekend, everybody. Happy Canada Day again to all my Canadian friends. And happy 4th of July to all my U.S. friends. And I hope you have a great weekend and be safe in all that you do. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.